Hi everyone, apologies for the slight delay. We're just going to let everyone join the webinar and then we'll make a start. Okay, so numbers seem to have settled, so I think we'll make a start. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Jason Reeves. I'm CIEEM's Head of Policy, and we're hosting this webinar today on the People's Assembly for Nature. So I'm really excited to hear more about this. We will publish this video, we are recording it, this webinar rather, on our YouTube channel and our resource hub. So you'll be able to go and find it there afterwards. So let's make a start on today's webinar. So we know there's been a nature crisis, well, there is a nature crisis ongoing along with the climate emergency. Nature's declining internationally as well as nationally, and the UK is not starting from a great point. So I'm really interested to hear about this new approach, well, not necessarily a new approach, but a different approach, following on from things like the Climate Assembly and replicating that. And I'm also really pleased to see this happening, as it's one of the outcomes of the Dasgupta review on the economics of nature was around a more educated, informed population and connecting people with nature. So today we've got three presenters for you. They're going to talk about some of the issues, some of the processes, where we go next. And then we'd really like you to engage with us and the three presenters as well in the Q&A. So at any point, if you have any questions, pop them in there and we'll come back to them at the end. It'd be really nice to have a conversation with the panel at the end there. So yeah, please do feel free to use the Q&A function. You'll find that at the bottom of the screen. So let's introduce today's panel. So we've got Alex Hunt, who's Head of Advocacy and Policy at the National Trust. We've got Kaela Scott, who's Director of Innovation and Practice at Involve. And we've got Professor Pete Smith, who's Professor of Soils and Global Change at the University of Aberdeen. And then we've got a couple of other colleagues in the background who've helped us to put this together, Daniel and Rory, here for support, and might join us in the Q&A session at the end. So I think, if I'm right, Alex is going to start on the presentation. So let me get the presentation up and we will make a start with that. So can you see that?
Yeah, that's clear.
Great. Brilliant. Over to you then, Alex.
Okay, so I'm Alex Hunt, as one of three leads on the People's Plan for Nature and People's Assembly for Nature. So you're going to hear about two parts to that process. I'm going to take you through a little bit of the context for that. I'm going to hand over to some colleagues around the detail of the process that we're managing, and also how we're bringing in academic advice and evidence into the process. So if we go to the next slide. So why do we need a People's Plan for Nature? Well, the nature crisis just mentioned, affects everyone, and we as organisations believe that everyone has a role within that, and the public have a right to say something about how we find the solutions to do that. And that's why we've brought together the People's Plan for Nature. It's the biggest conversation we think that's ever taken place on the future of nature in the UK. And what we hope is, through this process, which is a really clear and credible process, that we have a plan that's really too big for anyone to ignore. It's a plan which also we're thinking about within the roles of those that can have an impact on nature and natural environment, also have a role to play. So it's not purely about coming up with a plan which is for government. Government's one part of that. It's also for local government, it's for businesses, NGOs, and communities and individuals as well. So all can play their part. So next slide. So why now? I think we've covered a little bit right in the intro. I won't rehearse some of that, but there are concerns that we've certainly got as nature organisations, and a sense of some progress rhetoric wise, but actually we need to get on and make a bigger change if we're going to turn things around for nature. So you get a sense of a real urgency for us to do that, and a need for the public to get involved, and from an informed way as well. We know that 81% of adults believe that nature's under threat, and you got those stats there really clearly that people wanting to take action, and now really is the moment to push that forward. So we as 3 organisations are convening this process and trying to work a process which we keep as independent and credible, but very much coming from the point of view that we feel that citizens have a role to play, and particularly through, I guess, new processes of participatory democracy, in which they can take evidence and hear evidence for themselves, and as citizens, through their own role as citizens, come to a view on what the right answers are. So next slide. So it's about the public acting together, and we've gone through 3 key phases. We're in the middle of number 2 on here, but we, late last year, held a national conversation and start to create momentum and start to create a vision for change. And that was a way for us to bring in some broader voices across that. But we're now into the heart of a citizens' assembly. We'll talk a little bit more about the detail of that. But there's 100 people, representative from across the UK, meeting over a sequence of weekends in which they hear evidence from people that know the stuff about the issues and the opportunities and the solutions. And through their deliberation come up with an action plan to push forward for change. So next slide. Here's a little bit of that line, what we've been through into the spring. So we're just getting into that, is from March will be the moment that actually the People's Plan gets out there. So we're going through we've just gone through 1 weekend of deliberation. We've got a final weekend in February where we really get into the detail of the actual plan. But the citizens have had 3 solid weekends of evidence to think about those kinds of things that are infecting nature and the different forces upon it. Next slide. So national conversation, if we just jump on to the next slide straight away. We launched this with actually a bit of a news story of some polling from YouGov, but to ask public to feed in their views against some catalytic questions around their visions for nature, what would it look like if we succeed into the future, as well as what nature means to them. We supported that as 3 organisations and through other networks to get that message out there, to draw in an audience to the public to respond to that. And across the country, we hosted in different locations through the Future Arts Network and also some National Trust properties participating as well, little message trees in which people could put their messages. Next slide. This is the numbers that came from that. We acknowledge that this is probably a part of the population that's slightly more motivated about nature, but nonetheless one that actually has some views, and you can see with those numbers a very broad reach that we got through running that part of the process. If we go to the next slide, these were some of the things that really came out of that. So we got a theme around nature and well-being, and people really saying how much it relieves stress and improves mental health. There was this interesting nuance around nature. It is a real bit much more than that. It's something about life itself, and a really strong, I guess, existential desire to look after and care for nature. And some, I think, really interesting aspects around when we are looking at this work, which is a 4 nations approach. So it's England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland. That actually connection to nature and links to identity are important, and there were different aspects of that. Some of it is around differences, national identity, differences around personal identity, regional identity, a sense of nature being driven into more than perhaps just the places we live in, but actually who we feel that we are ourselves. The visions called for changes about the way we should produce things, a different approach for how we think about green spaces, some better economic and policy outcomes for nature, and a really strong thread around enabling and bottom-up community action. Next slide. This is an illustration of what we did then, which is we took these findings and we worked with an artist to create some illustrations which brought to life the verbatims. These are the what people wrote in their responses to those initial questions, to take that into the People's Assembly as a starting point to help the citizens as they arrive, literally as they arrived, start to get into thinking about nature and getting their brain thinking about it a bit more. So I'll let you read the verbatim on the slide, but these illustrations were, very vivid ways in which people can start to get the meaning and the sense of the different ideas that we got from that national conversation. Next slide. So I'm going to hand over to Kaela from Involve. She's going to talk to you about the People's Assembly, the process that we've been through. And as I say, as I introduce Kaela, very much about how they're running that as an independent and clear process, as a bit of a firewall in the way that we run this as organisations. So we are NGOs interested in ensuring that the People's Plan is enabled, but we've worked with and commissioned Involve to make sure this is a really clear and carefully thought out process. Kaela.
Okay, I'll start, but then I think Pete's going to come in here as well. So yes, my name's Kaela Scott. I'm Director of Innovation Practice at Involve, and we are a independent charity that specialise in public participation and been brought in by the consortium who've sort of pulled the idea of this together to actually design and deliver the People's Assembly for Nature in a independent and neutral way. So as Alex said, it is 100 people. They've been recruited from right across the UK, actually. We've got people traveling quite a lot to join our weekends in person. And they're broadly representative of the demographics of the UK as a whole. And the main question that really has been put to them is, what should we do to protect and restore nature in the UK? And really what they're working towards, as we've said, is calls to action for a variety of different actors that all have a role to play here, from government through businesses, NGOs, charities, communities, and individuals themselves. And we're meeting with them over 4 weekends that are. First one was in person in Birmingham. We've done 2 online weekends, including just last weekend, and a final weekend coming up in a couple of weeks' time, where we're going to pull all the learning that they've done together and come up with these calls for action. Do you want to come in there, Pete, about the advisory group?
Yeah, I can take it from there, Kaela, and then I'll hand back to you later. Thanks very much. Next slide, please. So as Kaela's just introduced, we've met over 3 weekends so far, and there's another weekend coming up. And the Assembly is convening and including recommendations to develop a plan for action. And we're going to be aiming at governments, both local and national, food and farming businesses, non-governmental organisations, including charities, and communities and individuals. The members of the People's Assembly were selected through a process that ensured that we got a representative sample of the UK population geographically, and also from a bunch of groups, including disadvantaged groups. Next slide, please. These are some pictures of the advisory group. The advisory group consists of meets before every Citizens' Assembly meeting, and consists of 2 academic leads from the University of Oxford. That's Nat Seddon, Professor Natalie Seddon, who's shown in the top centre here, and myself, shown in the top right. And we act as the academic leads to ensure that there is scientific rigour in the process. But we also have a cross-section of society and interests on the advisory group: the Country Lender Business Association, NFU Cymru, the youth branch of the Land Workers Alliance, the Scottish Crofters Federation, and representatives from government and from NGOs, and also community groups. There's even a MasterChef winner and a restaurateur. The main point I want to get across on this slide is that although it's been convened by WWF, the RSPB, and the National Trust, it's been commissioned by them, it's run by independent specialists. But the detail of the content is being reviewed by this advisory group, and that represents a wide array of interests, overseen by the 2 academic leads. That's myself and Nat Seddon. Next slide, please. The first weekend was what is nature, and why do we need to protect it? Next slide, please. What we found there was that the first weekend set the context with the broad principles about what is nature, why are there tangible and intangible benefits, and what states it's in, and what can we do to protect it, and who has the responsibility to protect it. So that is, who are the actors that can make a change. So the participants also heard that it was a solvable problem, and the importance of evidence, and they were encouraged to apply long-term thinking when considering the issues, and also to ensure fairness and a just transition, and that was at the heart of everything that's proposed. Next slide, please. Here is just a flavour of some of the activities during weekend one, which is in person in Birmingham. A really vibrant, vibrant group, and it was really excellent. I only attended part of it online, but for the people who were there, said it was fantastic. And these are just some examples of the activities that were going on during that weekend. Next slide, please. For weekend two of the assembly, it focused on protecting and restoring nature. And I'm going to hand back over to Kaela now, who will tell you about what happened that weekend.
Thanks, Pete. So yeah, as Pete said, weekend 2 and 3 have met online, and any topic, I mean, you could think about this idea of the need to protect and restore nature. It's a massive topic, so decisions have had to be made alongside our academic leads and the advisory group about really what evidence that people heard. Although actually there's been real emphasis on making sure people are hearing from a variety of different speakers. If we can go on to the next slide, we start to see that over weekend 2, there were a number of different evidence sessions that really set out the context for a sort of deeper dive into what we're talking about when we're talking about protecting and restoring nature. So the morning session focused on sort of the frameworks, the things that are in place, what's working and what's not working, and why maybe some of the current systems are not delivering for nature. And if we go on to the next slide, we can see that in the afternoon, they actually moved on to thinking about, well, what could be done differently? What are some of the things that actually could be done differently? That idea of the art of the possible. Where are things working? And what, not just the specific examples, but what are some of the factors that are actually enabling some initiatives, some activities from across the country to really have an impact on protecting and restoring nature? And although the evidence, as we've been emphasising, is really important, actually the massive part of what members in the Citizens Assembly do is what they do with that evidence. So if we can go on to the next slide, we can see that although this looks like lots of speakers, they were all quite short talks. They were sort of to kind of kickstart discussions, kickstart the members' thinking. And so in their small groups and small facilitated groups, because very important, we have the facilitators there actually working to make sure everybody gets a chance to contribute in a fair and balanced way, they started to work through what they've heard. So this is just an example of one of the sort of Jamboards, so essentially a virtual flip chart, virtual post-it notes that they were using throughout to start thinking, well, what are the things that we're taking from the speakers that we're hearing? And then if we go on to the next slide, we can see that once they've kind of got these general principles together, actually it's about what do we as the members see as important? What are we taking from this that actually we can learn to drive these calls to actions forward? So identifying what are the big barriers, what are the big challenges, and what are the things that when we're developing the calls to action, which will be the focus of weekend 4, that we really want to focus on. So here, for example, when considering protections for nature. And the next slide shows how they then took that forward into thinking about, well, you know, what actually are the differences that we're trying to make? What are the factors that we need to focus down on? Who are the actors that actually can be most significant in this? And what are the roles of other actors? And for all of the different elements of the evidence that they're being provided with, this is a similar process that they're going through to focus in on what are the things that we need to come back to if we're really going to make a difference for nature. So the next slide shows again that, you know, weekend 2, we did continue. We continued into this idea of disconnection and reconnection from nature. And again, hearing from a really wide range of speakers there about sort of different perspectives on what can be done to, break this idea of people's disconnection from nature, which seems to be a growing theme. And then the next slide talks about where we went into really, well, what can we do about nature restoration, going beyond the sort of protection that we started with on the Saturday morning of that weekend, and really start to think, how can ideas for restoration really be scaled up? And again, focusing on not just the specific examples, but what are the factors and the sort of the conditions that are making something have the most impact. And the final slide that I have there is, you know, unlike slides that Pete got to show, the sort of view in the room, the 2 weekends in the middle are all online. And there was a lot of content for people to take on. But actually, I guess what I want to emphasize is actually the really important and exciting part of this process is actually what the members are able to do with that information once they've heard it. They're able to ask questions, they're able to interrogate the witnesses that come and present evidence to them, and start to think, well, what do we really see as being the important things that will drive this people's plan for nature? I think I'm handing back to Alex at this point for a bit of a recap of weekend 3.
Thanks, Kaela. So yeah, we've just gone through weekend 3. If we just jump ahead. So here we really got into the issues around food, farming, fisheries, the systems that kind of sustain our life in terms of our diet as well. And hearing again from a wide range of different speakers, practitioners, as well as academics, but really trying to get into understanding the dynamics of how this works on the ground. If we move to the next slide. It then goes into a bit more detail around the, I guess, the oceans and fishing industry, and also getting into issues around regenerative approaches for food production that work both at land and sea as well. So next slide. And then, unfortunately, Henry listed on the slide was unavailable, and so didn't actually cover that. Pete stood in and covered on the food strategy. But again, going in for some slightly different angles around food and diet. So getting that sense from people that produce food, people that have been involved in policy around food, companies like Tesco and their procurement sustainability, as well as community groups that are thinking about how food networks work as well. And next slide. And then we finished off with a bit around water, but in particularly an interesting session for the citizens. And I think actually for a lot of us participating in observing as well, we've had observers through the process, is a really interesting deep dive around the economics of biodiversity. And as Kaela said, I would say, having seen some of the presentations, this is I feel like we've taken the citizens through a degree course in nature in the space of a number of weekends, but in a really approachable way. But the sheer breadth is astonishing, and all of these presentations are available online. So that's another part of the transparency process for us, is making those parts of the things that inform the deliberations available for all to see. Next slide. So to reiterate, by the end of this weekend 3, Assembly members have heard from, this is our sort of 12 days of Christmas, but 9 academics, 9 NGOs, 6 farmers, 3 independent consultants and companies, 3 government agency staff, board members, 2 local authorities, 2 community groups, 1 fisheries association, 1 water company, 1 regional food programme and 1 supermarket. It's an absolutely astonishing array of insight, expertise, carefully pieced together and brought together a way that citizens are able to engage with. So I think a really astonishing evidence base and breadth that we've managed to cover. Next slide. I can say a bit about this, I'll ask Kaela to chip in, but we're about to end into going to weekend 4. In this final weekend, there won't be any presentations. So they've taken the evidence, they've heard the evidence, they've been throughout the weeks beginning to download and start to process that work. We in weekend 4 get deep into the deliberations, which is really where we get into the process of the origin of the people's plan, actually turning it into a plan of action. Part of that is returning to some visions that they had at the start of weekend, of weekend 1, where at the end of that weekend they came up with visions, and I think that'll be interesting for them to look at those visions and see the distance they've come in their understanding. It's certainly been a process which has been, I guess, growth of knowledge and confidence about the issues. Again, the the process overseen by Involve will lead to a follow-on process where we capture those recommendations and convert those, translate those into a document that we can use as a plan. So this will be that final weekend where all of the threads come together, and also very much thinking about how can different actors play their particular role. So getting a bit more into shaping outcomes in that way. So next slide. So we move into a phase where the plan gets launched. That will be, I'll be curious, I'll be just cautious on the 9th of March. We're just still negotiating a precise date for launch around that, but it will be in that early part of March, will be the moment at which the Citizens Plan is launched, fronted by the citizens who created it. That's a very important part of the process for us, that it's of the people and should be shared from the people, and that's a really key part of it. This is where we legitimately as nature organisations step in, is that we see this as a really important plan, and that's where we're very willing to advocate on behalf of the plan, to get it to different actors and to support the citizens. We'll be talking to them about how they want to do this, to get their plan to the key people that need to make decisions. So yeah, trying to make that a very citizen led process, but where we as organisations with our networks and capabilities can also help them get that plan out and about there. The illustration in the corner there is one of my favourites from this was one of the verbatims that we had from the input phase of the national conversation, where this was about someone saying that it's important to nature have a voice at the table, and I quite like the way this is illustrated, but also illustrates, I think, the sense of empowerment that we're giving to the citizens as they've been through the process. And this is a personal reflection. I think this has been astonishing for me as someone's been involved around nature conservation for the best part of the last 2 decades, is the attentiveness and energy that the citizens have put into this process has been a sight to behold. It has been really astonishing, the passions that it's brought from them, and their keenness actually to feel empowered as citizens. So it's been a really impressive process. Next slide, please. So just to say a little bit about the context in which this plan gets launched, this spring, if March through into April, we'll see the BBC broadcasting Sir David Attenborough's documentary Wild Isles. This is the only documentary that Sir David has voiced which is dedicated entirely to the British Isles. So this is about the nature of the British Isles. We see this as a moment where there'll be a huge amount of public attention, a huge amount of public passion for the sheer variety, beauty, splendour and diversity of nature in the British Isles, but also an important moment where actually that we don't want this to be the series which is the last chance to see this. This is a real moment where we have to see a turning point. And so we as organisations are also collaborating around the TV series and supporting communications through our members and much more broadly to draw attention to the issues that the People Plan has raised, but also many of the solutions. There's also some work we're doing in parallel, again, as 3 organisations, where we are have been creating some business films. These are sort of talking head programs, talking to leading experts and leaders in business. One general 30-minute film talking about how business and nature need to be brought together to address the nature crisis, and then thematic films which are a little bit shorter, 15 to 20 minutes, on marine and nature, food farming and nature, and one on finance and nature. And so through the year you'll also see those films launched as well, and they pick up quite a lot of themes that issues that the citizens have heard about and are beginning to process and build into their recommendations. So at that point I think we are completed. Next slide I think is thank you. Thanks very much.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. Lots of food for thought there. We've got a couple of questions that have come in and something in the chat as well. All right. So I'll start with the questions that have come in on the Q&A for the panel. So there's one from here from Paula says, does every one of the 100 representative citizens feel and act engaged, and how do you encourage the quiet ones to contribute? Are there any of them in the 19% not concerned about nature? So I'm not quite sure where the 19% comes from, but a poll somewhere I'm assuming is people
I can pick
aren't
that up.
worried about nature.
we've been really impressed actually at how engaged the members have been. And actually, you know, when they first walked into the hotel in Birmingham, they're coming into an entirely unknown environment all over the world, all over the country with people they've never met before. But actually our facilitation team, so we have a team of facilitators there. People work in small groups of about 7, 8 each with the facilitator. And their role is really to ensure that everyone does have that ability to participate and has the opportunity to. Now, I think, you know, the fact that people have given up, well, 3 weekends now and are coming to the 4th, they've bought into the process. They're excited by it. They see it going somewhere. And okay, some people are a bit quieter. Some people are naturally, they just are a bit more reflective and like to contribute in different ways. But I would say that actually, yeah, all 100 are now very actively engaged with the process and feel that they're able to contribute. The evaluations we do also show that people feel they can, you know, feel that they're contributing and able to have their say. And the 19% not concerned about nature, yes, one of the recruitment criteria, we did this to make a demographic balance across the UK. So age, gender, ethnicity, location. But some of the other things that we used to create that spread were also attitudes towards nature. So we did recruit people who were not necessarily all, I think nature is the, you know, a big concern. So we do have that spread of views, at least at the beginning of the assembly, as to where people were starting from. So not just everybody who was already committed to, committed to protecting and restoring nature.
Can I add to that, Kaela? So in particularly on that 19% question, I think that comes from, I'm not completely sure, but I'm guessing it probably comes from the nature connectedness measure that Natural England have been working on, is now kind of an ONS type measure. We use that particular one of those statements within the criteria of the selection process. It was very much about that spectrum of people around nature connectedness through to not connected to nature, and that was really clear, which is it's a question that often comes with when we talk about this, is, well, how do you get people who have absolutely zero interest in nature into a room to talk about those issues? So we were very clear in the criteria to make sure that we accommodated for that. I'll say a little bit more just around the quiet ones, which is, this is me observing the work of Kaela and her team, and we're privileged to sit in on debrief sessions that you do, talking about the work that you're doing in the deliberations. And this is an interesting part of the process, which is, we as the 3 organisations never participate in the deliberations. We're there as part of the weekends, but we're very much in the background and supporting the speakers and some of the coordination around observers. But the debrief sessions, for me, show the huge diligence that involved put into the well-being and participation of those that are taking part. When the sessions have been online, you know, daily life gets in the way for some people, and the facilitators are noting that, are going back and following up, checking people are okay, making sure that they've got the right things to support them to do it. And there's a whole host of stuff that involves done around technology and helping people when they're doing the online weekends to be able to access the technology, making sure that they sort of, I guess, citizens plan a little bit for the weekend so they're ready to go, doing a lot of support there. And there's even a strand of wellbeing that's been throughout the weekends, where we do have a wellbeing support specialist who's there to help with some of those issues where, you know, you're often having people coming from a lot of different backgrounds that bring with them, I guess, their experiences of daily life and issues that are important in their lives. And so that's been an important part of it.
That's great. Thank you very much. Moving on, we've got there's a couple of questions, actually. I think one of them just disappeared, around youth. So I'm assuming this is an over 18 engagement process, and there's quick, nope.
No,
there are a couple of questions around the youth there, so could you explain?
Yeah, no, I did just type the answer. The members are 16 and over, but other than that, they're younger people than that are not explicitly involved in this People's Plan for Nature, although the national conversation obviously was open to anyone who wanted to participate in that. In this particular case, that's the only direct involvement.
Yeah, and just to add on, Kaela, on the quota stuff, on the sortition process, is that rather than just sort of doing a 16 to 25 age group and trying to hit a quota in that, we split that down again to make sure that we didn't lose that kind of 16 to 18-year-old and get representation there, because it would be very easy to overlook that. So that was another part of the selection process as well. Sorry, Kaela.
Yeah, and they're definitely there, and they're definitely very actively involved.
That's great. Are there any plans to involve or to have some kind of outreach for under 16s as well then?
I'll partly answer this. I might ask if Rory's got a little bit more on it, but another this is part, I guess, a wider program of collaboration that we're doing as 3 organisations, and within that there has been a youth strand to it. So we've been getting some funding in to support that. I think as we look forward to engagement around the People's Plan, we'll be using our networks, but also I think we're going to be asking lots of others to help us do that, so to get the plan out there. And I think it is an interesting idea, important opportunity to share the plan. Rory, I don't know whether you had any more to say about the youth aspect.
Not much to add, Alex, to that, what you said about the funding and attempting to get some money in to do that. Other thing to say, I think, is that we had a few from our organisations and for UK Youth for Climate, a few folks observing this past weekend. So there's been an opportunity for outside observers to peer into the process and see what's going on. And we had quite a lot of youth representation this past weekend, I think including under 16s, because we had safeguarding folks there just to make sure they were okay. So there's already been that external interest, and as you say, Alex, there's an intent to do some of that engagement once the plan's out there, and also that we've captured the age bracket that you mentioned in terms of participation too.
That's great, thank you. There's more of a comment rather than a question, is around surprised to see there wasn't more mention of planning and development in the briefings, I suppose, the presentations to the assemblies. I suppose there was Tom Chew I saw in there, would have been some.
Yeah, there was I think 3 or 4 main ones. So Tom Chew, I guess it was that balance. We did have some local government talking very broadly about local government, but there was a big slice of planning within that. Tom Chew we used as a practical example of this is a process that he's worked whereby it's all about newts, and it's the ability to really do well, the idea that newts get in the way of development is doing this at a district scale of licensing allows you to I guess plan and offset in a more intelligent way, which then enables development, but also enables a nature restoration. So they had that one, and then there was a really interesting presentation from Barrett Homes as well, which was, I guess, not necessarily about planning, but much more about design and construction and the housing that we have, and the ways, the choices that you can make there that make places much more nature friendly and integrate nature into them. So there was a chunk of that, but yeah, I think that's been the biggest dilemma across the entirety of this process. In the space of 3 weekends, it's such a big topic range. Trying to give the breadth and just enough depth has been something. I don't know whether Pete wants to say anything about that. Of can we have a little bit more of that and maybe a little less of that? Pete, I don't know whether you've had to say on that.
Not particularly. I think what we do at the outset is we try to make sure that we got a balance, and if it comes up in the discussions and the deliberations, we try and make sure that we get the experts to answer them and provide them with more information, and maybe even sort of like where they can look up the information from outside. So I think we try to get a good balance from the outset, which I think we've done. And if there's anything that people feel that's not particularly covered or they'd like to hear more about, then we could reflect on that and try and bring that information in.
That's great, thank you very much. So we've got a question from Annie around how do you ensure the long-term sustainability of the People's Assembly for Nature, and then perhaps one for Kaela on what lessons were learned from the UK Climate Assembly process.
Shall I kick off and hand over to you, Kaela, on that one? Just on the long-term sustainability, we've been working with Involve a lot around that. I guess the phrase we've been talking about is onward journey, and Kaela will talk about what we learned from the Climate Assembly, and that's something that we've also started talking to the citizens about. So we've opened that conversation in this weekend, which is, well, there's going to be a plan here, and there's going to be things to be involved in beyond the end of this process as it's currently constituted. So we've been opening that. Kaela, do you want to say about how you've done that in previous processes, and particularly Climate Assembly?
Yeah, no, just to add that I think one of the sort of byproducts in a way of people getting involved in process like this is that for quite a number of the participants. They become quite activated about whatever the issue is, and whether that's nature, whether it's, say, with the Climate Assembly UK or whatever other process, a similar sort of assembly is happening, that actually they take a real ownership of the plan, and they are the best advocates for it. They're the ones who've sat and done the thinking and actually have become passionate about why certain things seem important and other things that they really want to see happen in the world around them. So we will be working with them to build both their capacity to be able to speak to different audiences, to take on a more of a kind of advocacy role as well, rather than, to build up their sort of media savviness and their ability to go and talk to whoever it might be, so that they can become those advocates. And we're looking at, building that onward journey. We learned that from Climate Assembly UK. We know that sort of 2-3 years later, people are still taking that advocacy role in their own local communities, and support the members of this assembly to do something similar.
Thank you. So sort of following on from that, there's a question from Andy, which is around, are you concerned that the plan may turn out not to be quite what academics or NGOs want and what they think is needed and essential? So what were the outcomes of the actual assembly? What do the people think needs to happen, rather than as in our perhaps slightly gilded towers?
Could I take that one? I think that would be healthy. I mean, what we do is we just prevent. Firstly, we don't know because they haven't put together the people's plan yet. That happens at the next weekend at the start of February. What we do is we make sure that, as the academic leads, we make sure that the evidence that put in front of them is robust. But we don't have an agenda to drive what we want to see go into the people's plan. This is a people's plan. We're there to present the evidence in the most balanced and most scientifically rigorous way possible. And then it's up to the people that are contributing to the assembly to put together that people's plan of recommendations and action points moving forward.
And if I could just add, I know, it is a risk. Well, not a risk. It's a leap of faith in some way for the 3 NGOs that have been involved in commissioning this, that actually they don't know what the people are going to actually prioritize and really make as the focus of their calls for action. They know what they've heard, and they're trusting them to actually do that due diligence and work. And what we're getting out of the session so far is really people are digging into this, thinking very deeply and considered about what actually could be done differently, but also what are we prepared to do in our lives differently, and how can those things balance up together with an ambition to protect and restore nature.
That's great, thank you. An anonymous question, and perhaps not one that's directly linked in, but I'll ask it all the same. Does the panel foresee interaction between the People's Plan and the Environment Act's statutory requirement for preparing local nature recovery strategies and the National Nature Recovery Network?
Shall I have a go at that one? Everyone's looking at me, yes. Okay, and that's an interesting question. I think, I'll be honest, I don't think it'll link very, very closely direct into that process, but I think the principles of deliberative democracy could be a part of that model. So actually, how do you draw up local nature recovery strategies which have that people element to them? I think it's a very broad level. I think it'll be stimulus for what do the, when you take a sample of people from across the nation, what do they prioritize? What do they see as most important? And I think there's probably some general insights around how they're prioritizing on that. And I think, a sense of where they see the importance around nature recovery as well. But for me, the learning for me, and it takes investment and time and planning to do it, is that the power of deliberative democracy to it's not always about building consensus, but often about common ground. So there's some really interesting aspects of that process I've observed, which I think could be learnings to be taken forward.
Thank you. A question from Bethany: are you linking up with statutory nature conservation bodies? There's a picture of Tony Juniper from Natural England. there are formal opportunities that can help deliver ideas that may be in the People's Plan, for example, local nature recovery strategies. Rory's asked to come in on this one.
Well, Alex sort of mentioned there in his answer as well, so I won't repeat any of that, but I was just flagging it for answering because Tony Juniper actually at that session agreed that Natural England would respond to the People's Plan. So as well as us ourselves as NGOs responding to the plan once it's published in early March, Natural England have also now committed to responding as well, and so we're hoping to get others involved in responding too. But that's a great early signal there. So just wanted to flag that up. And Alex, if you wanted to bolster anything you just said, please go ahead.
I think the only thing I'd add is the work that we're doing to do it as a Four Nations approach. So equally trying to approach, and in the advisory group, we also have, I guess, state agency support from some of the other nations as well. But yeah, that would be also the challenge, getting a Four Nations response in that way.
Just on that, so in terms of divergent policy across the Four Nations, was this pitched at a level that was across the board? How is it going to be?
Yeah, I think we've acknowledged where there are elements which are very specific to particular nations. I guess we're asking the citizens to work on something that's fairly high level in terms of their recommendations, something that can work across the Four Nations. I think then there is a question for what does that look like in precise policy, or how individual nations respond to it, depending where they are in terms of what the citizens are saying. So you know, it's been quite a balance to make sure we get that representation of Four Nations without getting too stuck onto a solution that will only work in one. I think that's also been a part of it. So I've been quite interested because I think the variety of almost legislative and cultural context that we've got from that, you know, there's a really interesting, I guess, almost the relationship with the sea in Scotland has come through really strongly for me in a way that feels almost more natural for the people of Scotland. In England, actually, feels less so, and quite surprising for a lot of people to hear about the sea and hear about that. So yeah, I think some interesting differences there.
Thank you. There've been a couple of questions coming through the chat, the Q&A rather, around how do we get involved? Can we do screenings of the show? I'm assuming you can't speak on behalf of the BBC as to where things are screened, but how do viewers and site members get more involved in this process, and how disseminating it afterwards or supporting it?
Rory, do you want me to have a go at that one, or are you happy to? You want me to have a go at it? Okay. So, gosh, yes, the screenings with the BBC, we're still working through some of the details of that. There's going to be a premiere screening. There's various other opportunities for screening that we're trying to just work through the details at the moment. BBC have been brilliant to work with, but are very protective of what is an astonishing TV series and want to get it out there in the best possible way. But I think there are definitely opportunities beyond that. We've got the business films that we've been doing, and I think they pick up themes in a very interesting way, which probably work for audiences beyond business as well, actually. And we'll be looking at definitely community screening packages and ways to really get that out to screen. The one thing I didn't mention about the TV series is it's a slightly complex arrangement, but there is the core of the TV series, and then there is an episode which WWF and RSPB have collaborated on with the BBC, which goes into a bit more of the detail around people and nature. At the moment, just deciding how the BBC are going to broadcast that. It might be through the iPlayer that'll be broadcast. And I think there's probably more of a screening opportunity around that. I think we're interested to hear from people on this call if they've got some ideas or thoughts about networks that we can tap into, or things that would be useful for them to support us talking about the People's Plan. And yeah, I'm really keen to encourage as many conversations as we can. We're doing quite a lot of stakeholder briefings, and we'll be doing more as we get into the launch of the plan. But certainly up for people in this network suggesting ideas about how we can help them help us.
That's great. What would be the best way for people to get in touch?
They can come to, I guess, myself or Rory would probably be the people to come to. Happy to put our emails around after the session. Yeah,
we'll share them with an email afterwards then. Okay, I think that's. I've got a few more questions. I've got some great to hear this. Good luck. Waterbear might be a good platform. That's a streaming platform. yeah, moving forward, Britain forward as a whole, yeah, that'd be great. Is there anything else that anyone on the panel wants to add as a last comment, thoughts? I just want to say that all of the presentations, so all of the evidence have been shown, and some really interesting speakers and content is all available on the website as well. So that's part of both the transparency of doing it, but also spreading that awareness and knowledge and things. So I would encourage people to go and have a look at, you know, the evidence that's been there, not just to scrutinize it to see if it's been fair and balanced, but actually because it's really interesting. That's great. Thank you. We'll share that then with all the participants and add that to the YouTube link as well. That's great. What have we got here? So some thank yous. Is there a way to join the advisory group? I'm assuming that's already set. Yeah. Okay. I think that is a point for us to close things off then. So I just want to say thank you very much to the panel. It's been really, really interesting. It's great to see things like this moving forward. I was really impressed with the climate assembly process. So it's great to see this happening for nature as well. So thank you to the panel. Thank you for the presentation and all of your thoughts today. And thank you for everyone who's been listening and commenting with your questions. Thanks very much. All right.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.